The first crash shattered the refined silence of Seoul's Monroe Gallery like a gunshot. Glass exploded inward as six masked men burst through the entrance, weapons raised, voices cutting through the champagne-soaked air with brutal efficiency. "Nobody move! This is a robbery!" But let me back up. Because what happened that night, the violence, the theft, the impossible promise that followed, it all started 30 minutes earlier with two words that changed everything. Not you. Kim Tae-jun, one of Seoul's most feared organized crime bosses, had just offered to buy a painting for any price. And Zara Williams, the 27-year-old African-American artist who created it, had looked him dead in the eye and refused. Not because she didn't need the money, not because the offer wasn't generous enough, but because she knew exactly who he was. "I know what you are," she had told him, her voice steady despite the danger radiating from the man in the immaculate black suit. "You're a criminal, and I don't care how much money you have. My art isn't for sale to someone who built his fortune on other people's suffering." The gallery had gone silent. People didn't talk to Kim Tae-jun that way. People didn't refuse him. They certainly didn't call him out to his face while standing in a room full of Seoul's elite. His bodyguards had tensed, reading the stillness in their boss, that predatory stillness that usually preceded violence. But Tae-jun had surprised everyone, including himself. He hadn't been insulted. He'd been fascinated. The painting she'd created was called The Weight of Gold, and it showed a black woman crowned with gold that seemed to both elevate and burden her. Beauty and pressure made indistinguishable. It was raw, honest, technically brilliant. And the moment Tae-jun had seen it, he'd known he had to possess it. Not just want it, need it, the way you need air or water or vengeance. So when Zara Williams walked away from him, her head high and her braids swinging, leaving him standing before the painting, she'd forbidden him to buy. Something shifted in his carefully controlled world. For the first time in 20 years, someone had treated his power as irrelevant. And somehow, that made him want the painting even more. He was still standing there, still processing the strange mix of rejection and respect churning in his chest, when the robbers smashed through. The doors. The chaos was immediate. People screamed, dropped their glasses, scrambled toward exits that were already being blocked. The masked men moved with practiced coordination, not military precision, but the confident efficiency of professionals who knew exactly what they were doing. One carried spray paint. Another had a massive duffel bag. Two more flanked the entrance with batons and tasers, making sure no one tried to be a hero. "We're not here to hurt anyone," the leader announced in Korean tinged with a Japanese accent. "Just here for the art. Cooperate and everyone goes home with a good story." Tae-jun's mind was already processing, categorizing, planning. 6 attackers. Armed, but not with guns. Coordinated movements suggesting inside knowledge. This wasn't random. Someone had planned this, mapped the gallery, chosen tonight specifically. Then he saw where 2 of the thieves were heading, and his blood went cold. They were moving toward the weight of gold. One pulled out a utility knife and started cutting the canvas from its frame with quick, brutal efficiency. Another was already spray painting over smaller works, destroying what they couldn't carry. And across the gallery, Tae-jun saw Zara Williams, her face transformed by horror as she watched her masterpiece being stolen. "No!" she shouted, starting forward. "Stop!" One of the masked men grabbed her by her braids, yanked her head back with vicious force, and pressed a taser against her ribs. Not activating it, just threatening. Just making it clear what would happen if she didn't shut up and comply. That's when Kim Tae-jun moved. He didn't think about it, didn't calculate the risk, didn't weigh the strategic advantages of intervention versus observation. He just moved, crossing the space between them in 3 fluid strides, and before anyone could react, his hand had locked around the attacker's wrist with crushing force. The man screamed. "Drop the taser. Release Zara," as his fingers went numb from the pressure point strike. "You know who I am," Tae-jun said quietly to the leader, his voice carrying a promise of consequences that made the temperature in the room drop 10 degrees. The leader laughed, short, bitter, recognition dawning behind the mask. "Kim Tae-jun, of course you're here. Well, this just got complicated." They backed toward the exit, stolen paintings bundled in their arms. Tae-jun could have stopped them, could have called his men, could have turned this into a bloodbath. But too many civilians, too many witnesses, too much risk of someone innocent getting hurt. So he let them go, let them steal the painting, let them escape into Seoul's rainy night. But he memorized everything, every detail, every tell, every mistake they made. because Kim Tae-jun didn't forget, and he didn't forgive. When the thieves were gone and the sirens were approaching, he turned to where Zara stood against the wall, one hand pressed to her ribs where the taser had threatened, tears streaming down her face as she stared at the empty space where her masterpiece had hung. He walked over slowly, carefully. When he spoke, his voice was gentler than he'd known he could make it. "Miss Williams." She looked at him with devastated eyes. "They took it. 2 years of work. The piece that was supposed to launch my career. It's gone." "Not gone," Tae-jun said. "Taken. There's a difference." He pulled out a business card, simple, elegant, just his name and number, held it out to her. "I told you I wanted to buy that painting. You refused, but I'm not a man who accepts no easily. I'm going to get it back, and when I do, I'll purchase it from you at whatever price you name. That's not a request, Miss Williams. It's a promise." She took the card, staring at it like she couldn't process what he was saying. "Why would you do that?" "Because I decided that painting should be mine," he said simply. "And I don't like it when people take what I've decided to possess. I will find those men. I will retrieve your painting, and then we'll have a conversation about its price." "That's not a promise. It's a statement of fact." He left her standing there, business card in hand, while his mind was already moving through the connections and leverage points that would lead him to the thieves, already planning the hunt that would begin before dawn. Behind him, Zara Williams clutched his card and wondered if she'd just watched the devil make a promise he had no intention of breaking. Somewhere in Seoul's rain-soaked streets, 6 men were celebrating their successful heist, completely unaware they'd just stolen from the most dangerous man in the city. Their celebration was about to become very, very short-lived. Because when Kim Tae-jun made a promise, he kept it. No matter the cost, no matter the violence required, no matter what it revealed about the man behind the carefully constructed mask. And this promise? This one was personal. The rain had intensified by the time Tae-jun reached his car, a sleek black sedan that waited like a predator in the darkness. His driver opened the door without a word, well-trained in the art of silence when his employer's face wore that particular expression of cold focus. Inside the vehicle's leather interior, Tae-jun pulled out his phone and began making calls before they had even pulled away from the gallery. The first was to Minho, his second-in-command and the most ruthlessly efficient investigator in his organization. 6 men, Tae-jun said without preamble when Minho answered. Professional crew, coordinated but not military. Leader spoke Korean with a Japanese accent, possibly Tokyo dialect. They knew the gallery layout, which means inside information. They targeted specific pieces, including one painting they cut from its frame. "I want to know who they are, who they work for, and where they're taking the stolen art. You have 12 hours. "Understood," Minho replied, and Tae-jun could hear him already moving, already beginning the process. "Should I assume this is personal?" "It's about property," Tae-jun said, which was both true and not true at all. "Property I intend to acquire. These men interfered with my plans. Find them." He ended the call and immediately dialed another number, this one connecting him to a woman named Yuki who ran an information network that spanned Seoul, Tokyo, and half of East Asia. Her specialty was art theft, among other things, and if anyone would know about a new crew operating in the city, it would be her. "Kim-san," Yuki answered, using the Japanese honorific she always employed with him despite his Korean heritage. They had a complicated history, and she was one of the few people who could speak to him with a degree of familiarity. "I was wondering when you'd call. I heard about the gallery incident." "You heard quickly," Tae-jun observed. "I have people everywhere, you know that. And a robbery at one of Seoul's most prestigious galleries during an exhibition attended by the city's elite. That's the kind of news that travels fast." She paused. "I also heard you were there. Personally involved even. That's not like you." "The situation was unique," he said, not elaborating. "What do you know about the crew?" Yuki was quiet for a moment, and Tae-jun could hear the soft click of her keyboard, the rustle of papers. "Not much, which is interesting in itself," she finally said. "The MO suggests professionals, but they're not part of any of the established networks I track. New players, maybe, or imported talent. The choice of target is curious, too. High profile enough to be bold, but not high security enough to be suicidal. They wanted to make a statement." "What kind of statement?" Tae-jun asked. "That they're available for hire, that they're not afraid of consequences?" "Could be either. But Tae-jun? Her voice became more serious. If you're planning to go after them personally, you should know that art theft crews don't usually work alone. They have buyers lined up before they ever hit a target. Whoever took that painting already knows where it's going. Finding the thieves won't necessarily mean finding the art. Then I'll find both, Tae-jun said simply. I need a list of every buyer in Asia who deals in stolen contemporary art, particularly works by emerging artists. And I need it in 6 hours. That's a big ask, Yuki said, but there was admiration in her voice. You really want this painting, don't you? Must be something special. It is, Tae-jun agreed. And you'll have what I need? You know I will. But Tae-jun, be careful. New players can be unpredictable, and unpredictable means dangerous. He thanked her and ended the call, then leaned back against the seat, watching Seoul's lights blur past through the rain-streaked window. His mind was already several moves ahead, mapping out the network of connections and leverage points that would lead him to the stolen painting. But underneath the strategic planning, there was something else, an image that wouldn't leave his mind. Zara Williams, tears streaming down her face as she stared at the empty space where her art had been. The raw emotion in her expression, the way she had looked at him when he made his promise, as though she wanted desperately to believe him but couldn't quite let herself. He had been in the criminal world for 20 years, had built an empire on violence and calculation, had learned to view everything and everyone as assets or obstacles. But something about this woman had bypassed all his carefully constructed defenses. It wasn't just her beauty, though she was undeniably striking. It wasn't even her talent, though the painting had genuinely moved him. It was her honesty, her willingness to refuse him even when it might cost her everything. Her clear-eyed assessment of who and what he was, delivered without fear or moral superiority, just plain truth. She had called him a criminal, and she had been right. But she had also looked at him in that moment after the robbery, after he had intervened and he had seen a flicker of something else in her eyes. Not gratitude exactly, but recognition. An acknowledgement that perhaps he was more complex than the simple category of criminal allowed. The car pulled up to his building, a modern high-rise in Gangnam that housed his office on the top 3 floors. Tae-jun rode the private elevator to his penthouse office, where floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the city he controlled. His staff was already assembled, summoned by his earlier calls. Minho stood near the desk, tablet in hand, his expression all business. Next to him was Sung-min, the organization's financial expert, and Ji-woo, who handled their legitimate business fronts. 3 men who knew every detail of his empire, who had proven their loyalty with blood and time. Status, Tae-jun said, shrugging off his jacket and draping it over his chair. Minho stepped forward. I've already reached out to our contacts in the police department. They're treating this as a standard robbery, haven't connected it to any organized groups yet. I've also put word out on the street. Anyone with information about a new crew working art heists will be generously compensated. We should start getting responses within a few hours. The gallery's security footage? Tae-jun asked. Being procured as we speak, Ji-woo confirmed. The police have the originals, but our contact in their digital forensics department will provide us with copies. We'll have them before morning. Good. Tae-jun turned to Sung-min. I need a financial profile on Zara Williams, but Ji-woo, I want it done carefully. No harassment, no intimidation. Just information, background, connections, finances. I want to understand who she is. Sung-min raised an eyebrow, subtly but enough for Tae-jun to notice. Is this related to retrieving the painting, or is this personal? It's complicated, Tae-jun said, which was as close to an admission as any of them were likely to get. But yes, it's related. She created that painting. To get it back and convince her to sell it to me, I need to understand what it means to her, what she values, how she thinks. Minho exchanged a glance with the others, and Tae-jun knew what they were thinking. In all the years they had worked for him, they had never seen him take such a personal interest in anything, let alone anyone. He was famously detached, viewing every situation through the lens of strategic advantage rather than emotional investment. But this was different, and they could all sense it. There's something else, Minho said carefully. The Japanese accent you mentioned? I have a theory. There's been chatter lately about a crew operating out of Busan, working the high-end theft circuit. They're said to be connected to some Tokyo Yakuza families who are trying to expand their operations into Korea. If this is them, it's not just about the art, it's about territory. a statement that they can operate in Seoul itself, right under our noses. Then they've made a very serious mistake, Taijun said quietly, and there was ice in his voice. Because now it's not just about retrieving stolen property. It's about sending a message of our own. No one operates in this city without my permission, and no one steals what I've claimed as mine. The room fell silent, everyone understanding the implications. What had started as an art theft at a gallery had just become something much larger, a challenge to Taijun's authority, to the carefully maintained order of Seoul's criminal underworld. It would require a response that was decisive, visible, and absolutely uncompromising. But first, they needed to find the men who had taken the painting. And Taijun was very good at finding people who didn't want to be found. The next 12 hours passed in a blur of activity that was invisible to the normal world, but created ripples throughout Seoul's underworld. Informants were contacted, debts called in, pressure applied at carefully selected points in the city's criminal network. Money changed hands, threats were made and received, old alliances were tested, and new ones provisionally formed. Taejun coordinated it all from his office, his mind working with the precision of a master strategist moving pieces on a vast, complex board. By dawn, they had their first real lead. It came from an unlikely source, a low-level fence who operated out of Yongsan, dealing primarily in stolen electronics, but who occasionally dabbled in the art world. He had been approached the day before the gallery robbery by someone asking about potential buyers for high-value contemporary pieces, origin flexible. The description of the man matched one of the thieves Taijun had observed, and the fence had been smart enough to play along while gathering information. They're using a warehouse in Mapo, Minho reported, laying out surveillance photos on Taijun's desk. Industrial area, lots of empty buildings, perfect for storage and modification of stolen goods. Our people have been watching it since we got the tip. 3 men went in carrying boxes about 2 hours ago. They haven't come out. Taejun studied the photos with careful attention. The warehouse was nondescript, exactly the kind of place that would attract no attention. Smart. How many total? Best guess is 5 to 7 people inside at any given time. They're running a rotation, which suggests they're planning to stay there for a while, probably waiting for their buyer to arrange transport out of the country. Weapons? Unknown, but we should assume yes. If they're Yakuza connected, they'll be armed. Probably nothing too heavy. They're thieves, not soldiers, but enough to be dangerous. Taejun nodded slowly, already formulating the approach. He could call the police, provide an anonymous tip that would lead to a raid. It would be safe, clean, and it would recover the painting. But it wouldn't send the message he needed to send. It wouldn't establish with crystalline clarity that Seoul was his city, and that stealing from him, even indirectly, carried consequences that no amount of Yakuza protection could prevent. We go in tonight, he said. Full team, armed, prepared for resistance. I want the painting recovered undamaged, and I want at least 2 of the thieves alive for questioning. The rest? He left the sentence unfinished, but everyone understood. There would be a price paid in blood. And the police? Jiwoo asked. We have contacts in the department who can delay response time, Taijun said. Make sure they're alerted. We'll need at least 30 minutes after we go in before any official presence arrives. Minho was nodding, already mentally organizing the logistics. And you're coming personally? It wasn't really a question. He already knew the answer. Taijun never delegated operations of this importance. I made a promise, Taijun said simply. I intend to keep it. As his team dispersed to make preparations, Taijun found himself once again thinking of Zara Williams. He wondered if she was sleeping, or if she was lying awake mourning her lost work. He wondered if she had told anyone about his promise, or if she had dismissed it as the empty boasting of a criminal trying to impress her. He wanted to call her, to tell her that he was close to fulfilling his word, but he resisted the urge. When he contacted her again, it would be with her painting in hand. Proof that he was a man who kept his promises regardless of how impossible they seemed. His phone buzzed with a message from Yuki. The list he had requested was attached. Over 40 names of collectors and dealers who specialized in stolen contemporary art, organized by location and likelihood of involvement. He scrolled through it methodically, looking for patterns, for connections to the crew they had identified. There, a name that appeared on 3 separate transactions involving Yakuza-connected theft rings. a Chinese dealer based in Shanghai who had recently been making inquiries about Korean artists specifically. Taijun forwarded the information to Minho with instructions to investigate further. The day crawled by with agonizing slowness. Taijun tried to work, reviewing legitimate business reports and signing off on legal contracts. But his mind kept wandering back to the approaching operation. Not because he was nervous, he had done this too many times to feel anything as simple as nerves, but because he was thinking about what came after, about the moment when he would present the painting to Zara and watch her face transform from loss to joy, about the conversation they would have, the negotiation over price that he suspected would be unlike any business transaction he had ever conducted, about the way she had looked at him in the gallery, with that mixture of judgment and reluctant fascination that suggested she found him both repellent and compelling. As twilight fell over Seoul, Taijun changed into tactical gear, all black, practical, designed for movement and violence. His team assembled in the underground garage, 8 men including himself, all of them veterans of previous operations that had required discretion and decisive force. They loaded into 2 vehicles and drove through the evening traffic toward Mapo, toward the warehouse where the thieves waited, completely unaware that their time had run out. Taijun checked his weapon one last time, feeling the familiar weight of it in his hand. He wasn't a man who enjoyed violence for its own sake. He had seen too much of it, caused too much of it, to find any pleasure in the act itself. But he understood its necessity, its role as a language that some people only understood. Tonight he would speak that language with absolute fluency. And when it was over, he would have the painting. He would have fulfilled his promise. And perhaps, just perhaps, he would have taken the first step toward possessing something even more valuable than art. The trust, or at least the attention, of a woman who had refused to be owned. The warehouse district of Mapo was a study in industrial decay. Abandoned factories stood like concrete skeletons against the night sky, their windows dark or shattered, their walls covered in fading advertisements and graffiti. The few buildings that remained operational did so with minimal staffing, empty lots and chain-link fences separating them from their defunct neighbors. It was the perfect place for illegal activity, isolated enough to avoid casual scrutiny, accessible enough to facilitate quick escapes, forgettable enough that no one who saw something would remember it later. Taijun's vehicles approached with their lights off, navigating the potholed streets through the blue glow of distant street lamps. They parked 2 blocks away from the Target warehouse, and the team disembarked in silence, checking their equipment with the practiced efficiency of professionals. Minho distributed earpieces that would allow them to communicate during the operation, and Jiwoo synchronized their movements with the police contacts who would ensure no interference until they were finished. Thermal scan shows 5 signatures inside, one of the tech specialists reported, studying the reading on a handheld device. 4 on the ground floor, 1 elevated, probably a lookout on the 2nd level. No indication of additional occupants in adjacent structures. Taijun studied the warehouse's layout, which Minho had acquired through city records that afternoon. The building was roughly 40 meters long and 30 meters wide, with the main entrance facing west and a service entrance on the south side. High windows along the upper level would provide some natural light during the day but were currently dark. 2 vehicles were parked near the main entrance, a van that likely belonged to the thieves and a smaller sedan that could belong to anyone. We split into 2 teams, Taijun decided, his voice low and carrying absolute authority. Minho, you take 4 men through the south entrance. Create noise, draw their attention. My team enters through the main door 60 seconds later. We want them focused in one direction when we hit them from the other. Everyone nodded their understanding. This was a classic pincer movement, designed to create confusion and reduce the enemy's ability to mount coordinated resistance. Taejun didn't expect the thieves to surrender quietly. Men who stole art from organized crime territories were either very brave or very stupid. And either way, they would fight. But surprise would give his team the critical advantage. Remember, Taejun added, his eyes moving across each face, the painting must be recovered intact. That is the primary objective. Everything else is secondary. If you have to choose between capturing a thief and protecting the artwork, choose the artwork. Understood? A chorus of quiet affirmations. Then they moved, splitting into their assigned teams and advancing on the warehouse from different angles. Taijun led his group around to the main entrance, their footsteps silent on the cracked pavement, their weapons held ready but not raised. They positioned themselves on either side of the large metal door, waiting for Minho's signal. The seconds stretched out. Taijun's heartbeat was steady, his breathing controlled. This was the moment before action, the space where everything hung in perfect balance before physics and violence took over. He had been in this moment hundreds of times, and each time he found it oddly peaceful, a clarity that came from knowing exactly what he was about to do and why. Then Minho's voice crackled in his earpiece. Breach in 3, 2, 1, execute. The sound of splintering wood echoed through the night as Minho's team smashed through the south entrance. Taejun waited, counting under his breath. He heard shouting from inside the warehouse, running footsteps, the clatter of something heavy being knocked over. 60 seconds. 55. 50. At 0, Taejun kicked the main door. It flew inward with a satisfying crash, and he was through it in the same motion. Weapon raised, his team flowing in behind him with practiced precision. The interior of the warehouse was a cavern of shadows and harsh fluorescent light. The thieves had set up their operation in the center of the space, using folding tables and industrial shelving to create a makeshift workshop. Taejun's eyes took in everything in a split second. The stolen paintings leaning against one wall, some still in their frames and others already removed and rolled for transport. The tools and supplies scattered across the tables. And most importantly, the weight of gold, propped carefully on an easel near the back, still in its frame, but with tools nearby ready to extract it. The 4 thieves on the ground floor were in various states of panic. 2 had drawn weapons, knives, not guns, and were facing toward the south entrance where Minho's team was advancing. A third was grabbing for a bag, possibly containing more valuable pieces or perhaps just money and documents. The 4th was frozen near the painting itself, one hand outstretched as though protecting it or preparing to destroy it. None of them had yet registered the new threat from the main entrance. Taejun made his decision in milliseconds. The man nearest to the painting was the most dangerous. He could damage it in seconds if he realized they were cornered. Taejun crossed the distance between them in 3 long strides and struck the man in the back of the knee with his weapon. A precise blow that collapsed the leg and sent him crashing to the concrete floor. Before the man could even cry out, Taejun had his arm twisted behind his back in a lock that promised broken bones if he struggled. Don't move, Taejun said in Korean, then repeated it in Japanese, guessing correctly about the man's origin. The man went still, the fight draining out of him as he realized how quickly he had been neutralized. The rest of the warehouse erupted into chaos. Minho's team was advancing from the south, weapons drawn, shouting commands. The 2 thieves with knives made the mistake of trying to fight, and they were subdued quickly and efficiently. One tackled to the ground by 2 of Taejun's men, the other disarmed with a textbook wrist lock that sent the blade clattering across the floor. The thief with the bag tried to run, sprinting toward a side door that Taejun's team had overlooked. But Jiwoo was faster, intercepting him with a perfectly timed sweep that took the man's legs out from under him. The bag went flying, spilling documents and what looked like cash across the concrete. In less than 90 seconds, it was over. 5 thieves were secured, none seriously injured but all thoroughly restrained with zip ties and thoroughly aware that resistance would be futile. Taejun released the man he had been holding and stood, his attention immediately shifting to the painting. He approached it carefully, studying the canvas for any signs of damage. The lighting in the warehouse was harsh and unflattering, but even in these conditions, the painting's power was evident. Zara's masterpiece looked exactly as he remembered it. The golden crown that both elevated and weighed down its subject. The contemplative expression of the woman at its center, the layers of color and texture that gave it depth and life. It was undamaged. He had succeeded. Get it ready for transport, he told one of his men. Carefully. I want it protected as though it were worth more than your life, because to me, it is. While his team secured the painting and cataloged the other stolen items, Taejun turned his attention to the thieves. They were lined up against one wall now, all of them showing various degrees of defiance and fear. The leader, the one Taejun had heard speak at the gallery, was trying to maintain a facade of bravado. But there was sweat on his forehead, and his eyes kept darting toward the exits. You know who I am, Taejun said, not bothering to make it a question. He pulled off the man's ski mask, revealing a face in his early 30s, Japanese features, a scar across one cheek that suggested a violent past. The man nodded slowly. Kim Taejun, he said. We didn't know. We were told the gallery was clean, that there wouldn't be complications. Who told you that? Taejun asked. When the man hesitated, Taejun stepped closer, and his voice dropped to that particular tone that promised consequences beyond imagination. I'm going to ask once more, who hired you? Who provided the information about the gallery? And where were you planning to deliver the stolen art? The man's resistance crumbled. He was a thief, not a soldier, and there was a limit to how much loyalty he owed to employers who had clearly failed to protect him. A dealer in Shanghai, he said, the words tumbling out. Chen Wei, he specializes in contemporary Asian art, has buyers lined up all over the world. He provided the gallery layout, told us which pieces had the most value, arranged for our equipment. We were supposed to hold the art here for 3 days while he arranged transport to Hong Kong. Taejun filed the information away, already planning his next moves. Chen Wei was a name he recognized from Yuki's list, one of the dealers she had flagged as particularly likely to be involved. This confirmed the connection and provided a new target. And the Yakuza connection? He pressed. Were you working for them or just using their resources? Using them, the thief admitted. We paid for access to their equipment and safe houses, but this job was independent. Chen Wei doesn't like working through organized crime channels, says there are too many complications, too many people demanding a cut. Taejun almost smiled at the irony. The dealer's desire to avoid organized crime complications had led him to steal from a gallery where the most dangerous organized crime figure in Seoul was personally present. It was, in its way, almost funny. Here's what's going to happen, Taejun said, addressing all 5 thieves now. My associate is going to take your statements. You're going to tell him everything you know about Chen Wei, his locations, his contacts, his methods. You're going to provide names of everyone involved in planning this operation. And then you're going to leave Seoul, tonight. You'll go back to Tokyo or Busan or wherever you came from, and you'll never work in this city again. If I ever see any of you here, if I ever hear about you operating in Seoul, you won't get the chance to be arrested or deported. You'll simply disappear. Do you understand? The men nodded frantically. They had expected much worse. Expected broken bones or worse. And the reprieve of simple banishment seemed almost generous. What they didn't understand was that Taejun's reputation was built not just on violence but on proportionality. These men were tools, not masterminds. They had committed a crime, yes, but they had also been manipulated by a dealer who had failed to provide accurate intelligence. Punishing them severely wouldn't accomplish anything except waste his time and resources. The real target was Chen Wei, and dealing with him would require a different approach entirely. Minho began the interrogation process while Taejun supervised the careful packing of the weight of gold. His men had produced a custom crate, lined with protective foam and secured with straps that would prevent any movement during transport. They worked with surprising gentleness, these men who were more accustomed to breaking things than preserving them. Within 30 minutes, the painting was secure and loaded into one of the vehicles. The other stolen artworks had been photographed and cataloged. Taejun would arrange for their anonymous return to the gallery, along with information that would lead the police to Chen Wei's operation. 2 birds with 1 stone. He would be seen as a savior of the city's cultural heritage while simultaneously eliminating a competitor in the underground art market. As they prepared to leave, Taejun took one last look around the warehouse. This place had been, for a few hours, the center of his universe. The location where Zara Williams' masterpiece had been held hostage, where the promise he had made her would be fulfilled or broken. Now it was just another empty building in a district full of them, soon to be abandoned and forgotten. He climbed into the lead vehicle, the one carrying the painting, and they pulled away into the night. Behind them, the thieves were being released with their instructions and their terror. And somewhere in the building, carefully planted evidence would ensure that when the police eventually investigated, they would find enough to shut down Chen Wei's network without ever connecting it to Taejun's involvement. It was nearly 3 a.m. when they arrived back at his building. Taejun had the painting brought up to his office and carefully unpacked. Under the proper lighting, its full beauty was restored. The technical mastery, the emotional depth, the way it seemed to ask questions that had no easy answers about value and possession and freedom. He stood before it for a long time, thinking about Zara Williams, about the way she had looked when she created this, pouring some essential part of herself into the canvas, about the tears on her face when she had watched it being stolen, about the skepticism and desperate hope in her eyes when he had made his promise. He had the painting. The impossible had been accomplished. But now came the harder part. Now he had to figure out what came next. How did you return something that precious to someone who had made it clear she wanted nothing to do with you? How did you convince her to sell something she had created from her soul, even though that had been your goal from the beginning? How did you admit, even to yourself, that what you wanted had evolved from simple possession of art into something far more complicated and far more dangerous? Taejun pulled out his phone and looked at the time. Too late to call now. But in the morning, he would contact Zara Williams. He would tell her that he had kept his promise. And then they would see what happened next. Outside his windows, Seoul was beginning to show the first gray hints of dawn. A new day was coming, bringing with it possibilities that Kim Tae-jun, for all his power and planning, could not entirely predict or control. And for the first time in longer than he could remember, that uncertainty didn't bother him. It intrigued him. It called to him. It promised something more interesting than the absolute certainty he had spent 20 years building around himself. He looked at the painting one more time, and he could have sworn the woman in it was looking back at him, her expression understanding what he was only beginning to admit. That sometimes the most valuable things in life were the ones you couldn't simply take or buy or possess. Sometimes the most valuable things required something he had almost forgotten how to do. They required opening yourself to another person. They required trust. They required risk. And Kim Tae-jun, master of Seoul's underworld, was about to take the biggest risk of his life. He was going to try to earn the trust of a woman who had every reason to refuse him. And somehow, he was going to prove to her, and to himself, that he was capable of being more than the criminal she had named him, more than the cold calculator of risks and rewards, more than the man who took what he wanted without asking. He was going to try to be someone worthy of the art she created, someone worthy of the woman she was. And that, he was discovering, was far more difficult than stealing back a painting from a warehouse in Mapo. That required becoming someone he wasn't sure he knew how to be. But for her, he was willing to try. The morning sun was merciless in its brightness, streaming through the windows of Zara Williams's small studio apartment in Itaewon and finding every corner of her exhausted, grief-stricken face. She hadn't slept. How could she? Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the weight of gold being cut from its frame, saw the casual violence with which years of her work had been treated as nothing more than merchandise. The police had been sympathetic, but not particularly hopeful. Art theft cases rarely resulted in recovery, they told her gently. The pieces were usually already on their way out of the country, destined for private collections in places where questions weren't asked. They would investigate, of course, but she shouldn't get her hopes up. The gallery's insurance would cover some of the loss, but insurance couldn't replace the emotional and creative investment. Insurance couldn't give her back the soul she had poured into that canvas. She was sitting on her small balcony, nursing a cup of coffee that had long since gone cold, when her phone rang. Unknown number. She almost didn't answer, but something, intuition, desperation, fate, made her pick up. Miss Williams. The voice was low and even, instantly recognizable despite having heard it only once before. Kim Tae-jun. I have your painting? Zara's hand tightened on the phone so hard she was surprised it didn't crack. For a moment, she couldn't breathe, couldn't think, couldn't do anything but process those 4 simple words that seemed impossible. What? Her voice came out as barely a whisper. I told you I would retrieve it, Tae-jun continued, and there was something in his tone that might have been satisfaction or might have been something gentler. I keep my promises, Miss Williams. Your painting is here in my office, completely undamaged. I'd like you to come and verify its condition. Zara stood up so fast she knocked over her cold coffee, the liquid spreading across the small balcony table. You have it? You actually? How? The police said... The police have their methods, Tae-jun interrupted calmly. I have mine. They're less formal, but as you can see, more effective. Can you come to my office this morning? I'll send a car for you. A dozen questions crowded Zara's mind. How had he found the thieves so quickly? What had he done to retrieve the painting? How much of what she would see would be legal, and how much would confirm every assumption she had made about him being a criminal? But underneath all those questions was a simpler, more powerful emotion. She wanted her painting back. She needed to see it, to verify that it was real and whole and still existed. Yes, she said. Send the car. And Mr. Kim? Yes? Thank you. There was a pause on the other end of the line, and when he spoke again, his voice carried a warmth she hadn't heard before. You're welcome, Miss Williams. I'll see you shortly. The car arrived 30 minutes later, the same sleek black sedan from the gallery, driven by the same silent professional who had been present that night. He opened the door for her without a word, and Zara climbed in, her heart pounding with a mixture of anticipation and apprehension. The drive through Seoul's morning traffic gave her time to think, to try to understand what had just happened. Kim Tae-jun, a man she had met only once and insulted to his face, had somehow recovered her stolen painting in less than 24 hours. The police had been pessimistic about ever finding it, but this criminal had succeeded where law enforcement had failed. What did that say about the world she was operating in? What did it say about him? The building where Tae-jun's office was located was impressive in its understated luxury. Modern architecture, expensive materials, security that was visible but not ostentatious. She was escorted through a private elevator that required a keycard, and then she was rising through the building's floors, higher and higher, until the doors opened directly into what appeared to be a penthouse office suite. Tae-jun was waiting for her, and in the morning light filtering through his floor-to-ceiling windows, he looked different from the man at the gallery. He had traded his formal suit for something more casual, but no less expensive. Dark slacks and a crisp white shirt with the sleeves rolled up to his forearms. It made him seem more human, less like the perfectly controlled figure who had confronted the thieves. "Miss Williams," he said and gestured toward the far end of the office. "Your painting is this way." She followed him, and there, set up on a professional display easel in perfect lighting, was the weight of gold. Zara made a sound that was half sob, half laugh, and practically ran the last few feet to it. Her hands came up to touch the canvas, verifying its reality with fingertips that remembered every brushstroke. It was real. It was whole. It was here. "How?" she asked, not taking her eyes off the painting. "How did you do this?" The police said, "I have resources the police don't have," Tae-jun said simply. "I made inquiries through channels that aren't available to law enforcement. I discovered where the thieves were holding the stolen art. I retrieved it." His explanation was deliberately vague, and Zara understood why. He was giving her plausible deniability, allowing her to avoid knowing the specific details of what had been, almost certainly, an illegal operation involving some degree of violence. She should have been horrified, should have demanded answers, should have called the police herself, should have refused to accept the painting back under these circumstances. But she couldn't. She was too grateful, too relieved, too overwhelmed by the sight of her work restored to her. "The other pieces that were stolen," she said after a moment, "what about those?" "They will be returned to the gallery anonymously within the next few days," Tae-jun replied, "along with information that will help the police shut down the network that was responsible for the theft. Your fellow artists will get their work back as well." Zara finally turned to look at him. Really look at him. In the gallery, he had been intimidating. Powerful, controlled, dangerous. Now, standing in his office with morning light illuminating his features, he looked almost human. There was something in his expression, a carefully controlled vulnerability, that suggested this moment mattered to him in ways that went beyond simple business. "Why?" she asked. "Why go to all this trouble? You could have just moved on, found some other painting to buy. But you did this. You risked? I don't even want to know what you risked. Why?" Tae-jun was quiet for a long moment, and Zara watched him choose his words with the same care he probably applied to every important decision. "Because I told you I would," he said finally. "And because—" He hesitated, and that hesitation was more revealing than anything else he could have said. "Because you were right about me. At the gallery, when you called me a criminal, you were absolutely right. But I'm not only that. I'm also a man who appreciates beauty, who understands the value of things that can't be quantified in money alone. And when I saw your painting, when I saw what you had created, I wanted to be someone worthy of owning it, someone worthy of your respect." The honesty in his voice was startling. This was not the practiced charm of someone trying to manipulate her. This was something real, something that cost him to admit. Zara felt the ground shift beneath her feet, felt her careful judgments beginning to crack. "I still think you're a criminal," she said, but her tone had softened. "I still don't approve of how you make your living or the things you probably do, but you kept your promise. You gave me back something I thought I'd lost forever. That counts for something. That counts for a lot, actually. I appreciate your honesty. Taejun said with a slight smile. It's rare. Most people tell me what they think I want to hear, but you tell me the truth, even when it's uncomfortable, even when it might cost you. He walked over to his desk and picked up what looked like a contract. Which brings us to the business portion of our arrangement. I promised that when I retrieved your painting, I would purchase it from you at whatever price you named. I'm prepared to honor that promise. Name your price, Miss Williams. Anything you want. Zara looked at the painting, then at him, then back at the painting. A week ago, the answer would have been simple. She would have named some astronomical figure, taken the money, and used it to establish her career on her own terms without any connection to this man. But now things were more complicated. I want to know something first, she said. The thieves. What happened to them? Did you... She couldn't quite finish the question, couldn't quite ask if he had killed them. Taejun understood. They're alive and unharmed, if frightened. They've been encouraged to leave Seoul and never return. The information they provided about their employer will ensure that the police can dismantle a significant art theft operation without ever connecting it to me. No one died, Miss Williams. No one was even seriously injured. Violence was the last resort, not the first. Relief flooded through her, though she wasn't entirely sure why it mattered so much to her. Maybe because it suggested that for all his power and his criminal connections, he still operated by some kind of code. That he distinguished between necessity and cruelty. That he was, as he had claimed, more than just the simple category of criminal allowed. Okay, she said, and took a deep breath. Here's my price. I want 500 million won for the painting. That's what the gallery and I had agreed it was worth. Fair market value. Taejun nodded. Done. I'll have the money transferred to your account today. I'm not finished, Zara continued, and now there was steel in her voice. I also want you to establish a fund, a legal, transparent fund to support emerging artists from marginalized communities. Korean artists, international artists, anyone who has talent but lacks the connections and resources to break into the established art world. I want it funded with at least 2 billion won, and I want oversight to ensure the money is actually used for its stated purpose. Can you do that? For the first time since she had entered his office, Taejun looked genuinely surprised. You're asking me to create a charitable organization? I'm asking you to do something good with your money, Zara corrected. Something that doesn't involve violence or coercion or criminal activity. Something that helps people. If you want to own my painting, if you want me to believe you're more than just a criminal who appreciates art, then prove it. Use your resources to create something positive. She expected him to refuse or to laugh or to tell her she was being naive. Instead, he smiled. A real, genuine smile that transformed his entire face. You drive a hard bargain, Miss Williams, but yes, I can do that. I will do that. Consider it done. And one more thing, Zara said, her heart pounding because she knew this next request was the most dangerous, the most impossible to take back. I want you to tell me your story. I want to understand how you became who you are. Not the criminal part, I can guess most of that. But the rest. The person underneath all the power and the control. The man who looks at art and sees beauty instead of just investment potential. I want to understand you. Taejun's expression became unreadable again, but there was something in his eyes. Vulnerability, perhaps, or fear, or hope. Why? He asked quietly. Because I think... Zara hesitated, then committed to the truth with the same fearlessness she brought to her art. Because I think you're more interesting than you want people to believe. Because you've shown me kindness and integrity in circumstances where you didn't have to. Because when you promised to retrieve my painting, I saw something in your eyes that wasn't just about possessing art. It was about, I don't know, proving something. To me or to yourself, I'm not sure. But I want to understand what. The silence that fell between them was heavy with possibility and danger, and something neither of them could quite name, but both of them felt. Taejun walked over to the window and stood looking out at Seoul spread below them, the city he controlled, the empire he had built, the carefully constructed life that was suddenly feeling insufficient. If I tell you my story, he said without turning around, you might decide you want nothing to do with me after all. You might decide that the criminal is all there is, and that everything else is just a facade. Maybe, Zara agreed. Or maybe I'll discover that you're exactly who I think you are, someone complicated, Someone capable of both terrible things and surprisingly decent ones. Someone worth knowing. Taejun turned to face her, and the expression on his face was something she had never seen before. It was raw, unguarded, almost desperate. "I'm a dangerous man, Miss Williams. The world I operate in has no place for innocence or idealism. People who get close to me become targets. They become leverage. They become complications that my enemies can exploit. If you're asking me to let you into my life, even peripherally, you need to understand what that means." "I understand," Zara said, though she wasn't entirely sure she did. "I'm not asking for safety. I'm not even asking for friendship exactly. I'm just asking for honesty. For the chance to see you as a complete person instead of just a category. Is that something you can give me?" Taejun was quiet for a long time, and Zara watched him wage some internal battle with himself. Finally, he nodded. "Yes," he said. "I can give you that. But not here. Not now. This is the place where I'm Kim Taejun, the criminal boss, where every word and gesture is calculated for effect. If you want honesty, if you want to see the person underneath the role, then we need to meet somewhere else. Somewhere neutral. Somewhere I can be—" He trailed off, seeming unsure how to finish the sentence. "Human?" Zara suggested gently. "Yes," Taejun agreed, and there was something like relief in his voice. "Somewhere I can just be human." They made arrangements to meet the following evening at a small, quiet restaurant in Bukchon Hanok village, far from the center of Seoul's criminal world and the art scene's social politics. It would be neutral ground, a place where they could talk without the weight of their respective worlds pressing down on them. As Zara prepared to leave, her painting arranged for delivery to her apartment through legitimate channels this time, Taejun walked her to the elevator. They stood in the hallway, and the air between them felt charged with something neither could quite name. "Thank you," Zara said again, "for keeping your promise, for retrieving my painting, for agreeing to meet me." "Thank you for giving me a chance I don't deserve," Taejun replied. Then, almost impulsively, he reached out and took her hand. It was a simple gesture, his fingers wrapping around hers for just a moment, but it felt monumental. His hand was warm and calloused and surprisingly gentle, and the contact sent a jolt through Zara that had nothing to do with fear and everything to do with recognition. Recognition of attraction. Recognition of possibility. Recognition of danger that was suddenly thrilling rather than terrifying. "Until tomorrow," he said, releasing her hand. "Until tomorrow," Zara echoed and stepped into the elevator. As the doors closed between them, she saw him standing in the hallway, watching her with an expression that was hopeful and afraid and determined all at once. And she realized, with a mixture of excitement and terror, that she was falling. Not in love, not yet, not quite, but falling nonetheless. Falling toward something that could be wonderful or disastrous or both. Falling toward a man who was everything she should avoid and everything she suddenly wanted to understand. The elevator descended, carrying her back toward the ordinary world, but Zara knew that nothing would be ordinary anymore. She had just made a choice, had just opened a door that couldn't be closed again, and wherever it led, whether toward happiness or heartbreak, whether toward light or darkness, she was going to walk through it with her eyes open, because Kim Taejun, for all his crimes and his power and his danger, had shown her something in the past 24 hours. He had shown her that he was capable of keeping promises, that he was capable of seeing value beyond monetary worth, that he was capable of wanting to be better than he was. And if he was capable of all that, then maybe, just maybe, he was capable of something else. Maybe he was capable of being the man she was beginning to hope he could be. Only time would tell. But Zara Williams, who had built a career on taking risks with her art, was ready to take a different kind of risk now. She was ready to see where this impossible, dangerous, thrilling connection might lead. And somewhere above her, in his penthouse office, Kim Taejun stood before the weight of gold and understood that he had just made the most important purchase of his life. Not the painting, though that was precious, but the opportunity, the chance, the possibility of something more than the cold, controlled existence he had built for himself. He looked at the woman in the painting, at the gold that both crowned and burdened her, at the contemplation in her expression, and he understood, perhaps for the first time, what Zara had been trying to express. The paradox of value and pressure, the way that wealth and power could be both beautiful and suffocating. The question of what it meant to be truly free. He had spent 20 years building an empire, accumulating power, establishing control over every aspect of his life and his world. And now, because of one woman and one painting and one impossible promise, he was considering letting go of that control. He was considering taking a risk. He was considering the terrifying possibility of opening himself to another person. And that, he realized, was the real art. Not the painting on the canvas, but the art of being human, the art of connection, the art of vulnerability. It was an art form he had forgotten, or perhaps had never learned. But for Zara Williams, he was willing to try, even if it meant risking everything he had built, even if it meant facing parts of himself he had spent years hiding, even if it meant admitting that somewhere beneath the criminal and the boss and the carefully controlled exterior, there was still a man who wanted to be seen, a man who wanted to be understood, a man who wanted, more than anything else in the world, to be worthy of the woman who had refused to be impressed by his power and instead had demanded his truth. Tomorrow he would begin telling her his story. Tomorrow he would take the first step toward becoming someone new. But today he had kept his promise. And that, for now, was enough. The evening was cool and clear when Zara arrived at the restaurant in Bukshan Hanak village the next day. The area was one of Seoul's most picturesque neighborhoods, where traditional Korean houses had been preserved and transformed into cafes, galleries, and intimate dining establishments. The restaurant Taijun had chosen was small and discreet, tucked away in a quiet courtyard where paper lanterns cast soft light across wooden beams and stone paths. She found him already there, seated at a private table in the back where they would have some measure of privacy. He stood when she approached, and she noticed immediately that he looked different. Not different in appearance. He was still impeccably dressed, though more casually than at his office, but different in bearing. Some of the rigid control had softened, and in its place was something more uncertain, more human. "Thank you for coming," he said, gesturing for her to sit. "I wasn't sure you would." "I said I would be here," Zara replied, settling into her chair. "I keep my promises, too." They ordered food, traditional Korean dishes that arrived beautifully presented on ceramic plates. And for a few minutes, they made polite small talk about nothing in particular. But Zara could feel the tension building, the awareness that they were both avoiding the real conversation they had come here to have. Finally, she decided to be direct. "Tell me your story," she said. "Help me understand how Kim Tae-jun became who he is today." Tae-jun was quiet for a long moment, his fingers tracing patterns on the condensation of his water glass. When he finally spoke, his voice was lower than usual, almost contemplative. "I was born in Busan," he began. "My father was a dock worker, my mother cleaned houses. We were poor, but not desperately so. Just ordinary people trying to survive in a city where survival was a daily negotiation. I had a younger sister. Her name was Minji. She was 7 years younger than me, and she was—" He paused, and something crossed his face that might have been pain. "She was everything good in the world. Bright, funny, completely innocent. I adored her." Zara could hear the past tense, could sense where this story was heading, but she said nothing. Just listened. "When I was 15, my father got involved with the wrong people. He borrowed money from a loan shark to pay for Minji's medical treatment. She had a heart condition that required surgery. He thought he could pay it back, but the interest rates were designed to be impossible. Within 6 months, the debt had tripled. Within a year, it was 10 times the original amount. The men who had lent him the money came to collect. They were part of an organized crime family, and they didn't accept excuses or sob stories. They wanted their money. And when my father couldn't pay, they decided to teach him a lesson about the cost of failure." Taijun's voice remained steady, but Zara could see his knuckles whitening as his grip on the glass tightened. "They killed him, made it look like an accident at the docks. And then they came for my mother. Said the debt passed to the family. They gave her a choice, pay what was owed, or they would take Minji as payment. She would work for them until the debt was cleared, which, with their arithmetic, would be never." "Oh my God," Zara whispered. "Your sister was 7 years old?" "6 at that point," Taijun corrected quietly. "My mother tried to run, tried to take Minji and disappear into another city. But they found us within a week. They killed my mother. And they took Minji." The pain in his voice was raw, undisguised. "I tried to stop them. I was 15, thought I was tough, thought I could fight. They broke my arm and 3 ribs and left me in an alley. Told me that if I came after them, if I went to the police, if I did anything except accept what had happened, they would kill Minji. So I couldn't do anything. I had to let her go. Had to live with the knowledge that my sister was being held by men who saw her as property, as a debt to be collected. What happened to her? Zara asked, though she was afraid of the answer. I don't know, Taejun said, and that seemed to hurt more than anything else. I spent the next 3 years trying to find her, trying to get information about where they had taken her. But she had disappeared into the network, and I was just a kid with no resources and no connections. By the time I was 18, by the time I'd taught myself to survive and fight and navigate the criminal world, the trail had gone completely cold. She could be dead. She could be alive somewhere, having forgotten she ever had a family. I don't know. I've never known. And that not knowing, it's been with me every day for 20 years. The silence that fell was heavy with grief and understanding. Zara reached across the table and took his hand, the same gesture he had made to her in his office. But this time, it was comfort she was offering rather than simple connection. That's why you became what you are, she said softly. That's why you built your empire. I vowed that I would never be powerless again, Taejun confirmed. That I would never be in a position where someone could take what was mine without consequences. That I would become the kind of person who controlled the terms, who had the resources and the power to protect what mattered. I started at the bottom, running errands for small-time criminals, learning the rules of the underworld, studying how power worked. I was smart, I was ruthless when I needed to be, and I never forgot what had been done to my family. Within 5 years, I had my own small operation. Within 10, I controlled significant territory in Busan. Within 15, I had moved to Seoul and established myself as one of the most powerful figures in the city's criminal network. And the family that took your sister? Zara asked. What happened to them? A dark smile crossed Taejun's face, one that held no humor at all. By the time I had the power to confront them, most of the original members were dead or in prison. The organization had fragmented, changed leadership multiple times. I could have destroyed what remained, but it would have been meaningless. Revenge against an organization that no longer existed, against men who hadn't personally been involved in what happened to my family. So instead, I did something different. I made it clear throughout the criminal world that debt collection involving children was completely off limits in any territory I controlled, that anyone who engaged in that practice would face immediate and severe consequences. It's a rule everyone in Seoul's underworld knows. Break it, and you answer to me. It doesn't bring my sister back. It doesn't change what happened to my family. But it means that what happened to us won't happen to someone else's child. Not in my city. Not while I have the power to prevent it. Zara felt tears pricking at her eyes. This man, this criminal who had built his empire on violence and intimidation, had also created one small pocket of protection for the most vulnerable. It didn't absolve him of his crimes, didn't make him a good person in any simple sense. But it suggested that he was operating by some code, some internal compass that distinguished between necessary evil and unnecessary cruelty. Thank you for telling me this, she said, for trusting me with your story. I know it can't have been easy to talk about. It wasn't, Taejun admitted. I don't share this with people. Most of my own organization doesn't know about Minji, about my parents, about how I started. They just see the power, the control, the success. They don't see the foundation of loss and rage and grief that it's all built on. He looked at her intently. But I wanted you to see it. Because you were right. You deserve to understand who I am, not just what I am. And because... He hesitated, then continued. Because I want to be honest with you about everything. Even the things I'm not proud of. Even the things that make me look weak or damaged or broken. You're not broken, Zara said firmly. You're hurt. There's a difference. Broken things can't function. But you've not only functioned, you've thrived. You've taken an unimaginable trauma and turned it into something that, yes, involves crime and violence, but also involves protecting others from the same trauma. That's not broken. That's resilience. Maybe not the healthiest kind, but resilience nonetheless. Taejun looked at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. You're very kind, he said. Or possibly very naive. I can't decide which. Can it be both? Zara countered with a slight smile. I know I'm being idealistic about this. I know you're still a criminal who does illegal things and probably hurts people in the process. I'm not forgetting that or excusing it. But I also know that people are complicated, that you can be both dangerous and protective, both ruthless and principled, both a criminal and someone capable of keeping promises and creating scholarships and returning stolen art to its rightful owners. She paused, then added, I'm not asking you to be perfect. I'm just asking you to be honest. To let me see all of you, not just the parts you think I'll approve of. And if you see all of me and decide you want nothing to do with me, Taijun asked. That's a risk, Zara acknowledged. But isn't that what connection is? Risk? Vulnerability? The possibility that you'll show yourself to someone and they'll reject what they see? You've taken risks your entire life. Criminal risks, business risks, risks involving violence and power and control. This is just a different kind of risk, an emotional one. And maybe, she added gently, it's the kind of risk you need to take. The kind that might actually heal something instead of just protecting it. They talked for hours. The food came and went. The restaurant gradually emptied around them, but neither of them noticed. Taejun told her more about his life, about the choices he had made, the lines he had drawn for himself, the ways he tried to balance the necessity of his criminal work with some sense of personal ethics. He told her about the legitimate businesses he had established as fronts, and how some of them had actually become successful enough that he could consider transitioning away from purely illegal operations if he chose. He told her about the art he had collected over the years, and why each piece mattered to him, what it represented or reminded him of. And Zara, in turn, told him about herself, about growing up in Atlanta as a Black woman with artistic ambitions, in a world that didn't always take those ambitions seriously. About the struggle to find her voice as an artist, to create work that was both personally meaningful and commercially viable. About the loneliness of being an expatriate in Seoul, admiring the city and its culture, but always being aware of her otherness, of the ways she would never fully belong. They discovered unexpected commonalities. Both had experienced profound loss. Both had built their identities around overcoming that loss. Both understood what it meant to be underestimated, to have people make assumptions about them based on surface characteristics rather than actual character. Both valued honesty in a world that often rewarded deception. By the time they finally left the restaurant, it was past midnight. The street outside was quiet, the paper lanterns casting pools of warm light across the stone path. They walked together through the Hanak village, not touching but acutely aware of each other's presence. I should warn you, Taejun said as they walked, that what we're doing, this connection we're forming, it's going to complicate both of our lives. My enemies might see you as leverage against me. Your artist friends and colleagues might judge you for associating with someone like me. We're from very different worlds, and those worlds don't always coexist peacefully. I know, Zara said. I've been thinking about that, and you're right. It's going to be complicated. Possibly impossible. But... She stopped walking and turned to face him. But I've spent my entire life playing it safe, creating art that was acceptable, building a career through careful, cautious steps, avoiding anything that might jeopardize my carefully constructed path to success. And you know what? It was making me miserable. The painting you saw, the weight of gold, I created that during a period when I decided to stop being careful, when I decided to just be honest about what I was feeling and thinking, regardless of whether it was commercially viable or socially acceptable. And it was the best work I've ever done. Because it was real. She looked at him intently. This feels real too. Dangerous and complicated and possibly a huge mistake, but real. And I'd rather take a risk on something real than play it safe with something that's just comfortable. So yes, I understand the complications. And yes, I'm choosing to move forward anyway. Taejun looked at her with an expression that was equal parts amazement and fear, and something that might have been hope. You're remarkable, he said quietly. You know that? Absolutely remarkable. I'm terrified, Zara admitted, but terrified in a way that feels alive, like standing at the edge of something enormous and having to choose whether to step forward or retreat. And you're stepping forward, Taejun observed. I'm stepping forward, Zara confirmed. Then, with the same boldness that had let her refuse him in the gallery, she took the final step that closed the distance between them. She reached up and touched his face, her palm resting against his cheek, feeling the warmth of his skin and the slight rasp of stubble. "Kiss me," she said. It wasn't a question or a request. It was a command, delivered with absolute certainty, and it was the most dangerous and thrilling thing she had ever said. Taejun's control, already strained after hours of emotional vulnerability, finally broke. He pulled her to him with the intensity that was just barely contained, one hand sliding into her braids while the other wrapped around her waist. Their kiss was not gentle or tentative. It was fierce and desperate and full of all the complicated emotions that had been building between them since that first moment in the gallery. It was attraction and danger and recognition and promise all tangled together in a connection that felt inevitable. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Zara rested her forehead against his. "This is really happening," she whispered. "Yes," Taejun agreed, his voice rough. "I'm falling in love with a criminal," Zara said, and it should have sounded like an accusation, but instead sounded like wonder. "I'm falling in love with an artist," Taejun replied. "An impossibly brave, impossibly honest artist who called me out on my bullshit and then decided I was worth knowing anyway. So I think we're even." Zara laughed, the sound bright and free in the quiet night. "We're completely insane," she said. "Probably," Taejun agreed. "But I've been sane and controlled for 20 years, and it's been a cold, lonely existence. Maybe it's time to try insane instead. Maybe insane will be better." "Maybe insane will be better," Zara echoed and kissed him again. They stood there in the quiet Hanok village, these two impossibly different people who had found something impossible in each other, and for that moment, nothing else mattered. Not the complications that were surely coming, not the judgments and dangers and obstacles they would face, not the question of whether love could bridge the gap between their completely different worlds. For that moment, there was only this: two people who had chosen to be honest with each other, two people who had chosen to take a risk on something real, two people who had chosen to step forward instead of retreating to safety. And that choice, that brave and possibly foolish choice, was the beginning of everything. Tomorrow would bring challenges. Tomorrow would require decisions about how they would navigate their relationship, how they would balance her artistic career with his criminal empire, how they would protect each other while remaining true to themselves. But tonight, in this quiet corner of Seoul, Kim Taejun and Zara Williams simply held each other and chose to believe that impossible things could sometimes become possible. That love could bloom in unexpected places. That two damaged people could find healing in each other's honesty. And that sometimes the most valuable things in life were the ones you couldn't plan for or control or possess. Sometimes the most valuable things were the ones you had to risk everything to embrace. The painting that had brought them together hung in Taejun's office, a testament to the paradox of value and pressure. But the real masterpiece was being created here, in this moment, between two people who had decided that freedom sometimes meant choosing to be bound to someone else. Not through force or expectation, not through power or obligation, but through choice, through honesty, through the terrifying, exhilarating possibility of love. And as they finally walked back toward the main street, their hands intertwined, both of them knew that their lives had just changed forever, that they had just taken the first step on a journey that would test them in ways they couldn't predict. But they would face those tests together, because sometimes the bravest thing you can do is let someone see you. Really see you. All of you, without the masks and the armor and the carefully constructed facades. And both Taejun and Zara, each in their own way, had been wearing masks for far too long. Tonight, they had taken them off. And tomorrow they would see what happened when two people decided to be genuinely, vulnerably, impossibly real with each other. It was going to be complicated. It was going to be dangerous. It was going to be absolutely worth it. If you've made it this far in this incredible story, I want to thank you for joining us on this journey through the shadows of Seoul's underworld and the bright light of unexpected love. The tale of Kim Taejun and Zara Williams reminds us that connection can bloom in the most unlikely places, and that sometimes the most dangerous risks we take are the ones that open our hearts. What did you think of their story? Did Taejun's transformation from cold criminal boss to vulnerable man seeking redemption resonate with you? Did you feel the chemistry between these two impossible lovers? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one and love hearing your perspectives. And if this story captured your imagination, if you want more tales of forbidden romance, dangerous men with hidden depths, and women brave enough to see past the surface, then make sure you're subscribed to Gamboo. Hit that subscribe button and tap the notification bell so you never miss when we drop a new story. Every like, every share, every comment helps us reach more people who love these complex emotional narratives about love blooming in darkness. We've got more incredible stories coming your way. Tales of power and passion, of criminals finding redemption through love, of women who refuse to be anything less than completely authentic, even in the most dangerous circumstances. This is just the beginning. So, subscribe, hit that like button, and join our community of listeners who believe that the best love stories are the ones that challenge us, surprise us, and remind us that people are always more complicated than they first appear. Until next time, keep believing in impossible love, and remember, sometimes the most beautiful art is created when two people dare to show each other their unguarded, vulnerable, completely real selves.